Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report's weekly cyber report, sponsored by Northrop Grumman. I'm your host, Vago Muradian. Joining us today is Chris Valentino, the Vice President for Information Warfare and Cyber Survivability at Northrop Grumman. Chris, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the difference between cyber survivability and cyber resiliency. Those are two critical elements of cyber operations. What's the difference between the two?
Well, the best way to think about it is, resiliency is the ability to withstand, but most importantly, recover from a threat, whereby survivability is really focused on operating in the presence of a threat and essentially fighting through.
How are the two interlinked?
Yeah, they're certainly interlinked from an underlying capability perspective, requirement set to some extent for technical controls, and then overarching mission operations. So, for example, you may have a military platform that needs to be survivable, but it could be dependent on an infrastructure that has to be able to be resilient. So, in the sense of the aircraft can perform its mission, say with some type of degraded comms to another system for which it may provide updates to, but it's not required for it to perform its function and its mission. So it's a systems construct where you can have components that are survivable versus things that are just resilient, as an example.
You know, most people, when it comes to survivability, sort of understand armored vehicles. It's about armor or speed, or for a combat aircraft, it's agility or armor plating as well, being part of it, whether it's for ships or anything else, and some of the electronic systems they have on it. What does survivability look like in the cyber domain and battle space?
In the battle space, I mean, think about it as an idea of cyber armor that would be equivalent to physical protections you would have on the system. So your intent is to build a capability that is survivable and can effectively withstand a punch from an adversary, while the underlying systems and components continue to operate. Most if not all systems being enabled by some type of computing processor, computing system within the platform itself. Each one has a means or a need to be monitored and have the ability to essentially fight through an adversarial threat against that platform.
How are the government and industry addressing survivability? And let's start with what DoD is doing to improve the survivability of its cyber arsenal.
Yeah, well, the Defense Department is focused on looking at their weapon systems and implementing cyber survivability across those weapon systems with a focus on the new systems first. And I would say that the big change from prior attempts to protect platforms and systems to the new attempt with survivability is really taking a threat-based approach to a platform or a system, in the sense of looking at each platform in the eyes of an adversary and the specific threats that may be posed against those platforms, and then the technical controls and the capabilities that are required to then protect the system in the face of a specific adversarial threat against that weapon system or its subcomponents.
What's the progress like at this point, given the sheer scale and scope, not just of our dependence on cyber, but also the extensive nature of how adversaries are trying to exploit and constantly assault these systems? I mean, as the former Marine Commandant, General Bob Neller used to say, we've been in full-blown war in cyberspace for the past decade.
Well, I think what we're seeing is a greater appreciation for the problem, and it's not so much admiring the problem as it is a realization within the warfighting community that the threats, are real, and the potential impact against a particular platform or a weapon system exists, and there's a need to place that emphasis on the programs and not just from a checklist compliance perspective, whether it be RMF or predecessors to RMF, but really about what is the core functionality of my weapon system platform, what threats does that platform face, and then what are the technical controls, solutions, or capabilities that need to be overlaid within that system to be able to present a survivable platform from a cyber perspective.
And RMF is?
Risk management framework.
There
So
you go.
it's the current standard for certification accreditation of computing systems within the department.
Talk to us about how companies are folding cyber survivability and resilience into their systems from square one. And it might be easier for you to talk about this from a Northrop Grumman standpoint, but I suspect that your architectural approach is probably shared by other leading companies as well.
Yeah, so here at Northrop Grumman, we're focused on implementing and integrating our processes, procedures, and capabilities for survivability from inception of the system in the case where you have the opportunity to build a new weapon system. And in the case where you have existing systems, there's a construct around retrofitting or incorporating new protections in new block releases of a particular payload or sensor or platform. So we view it from a couple different perspectives. One is the actual core technologies and capabilities required to be integrated and implemented within the weapon systems platforms. And typically we look at things that are commercially available all the way through specialty processors and capabilities that have to be developed to be integrated into a weapon system. In addition to that, the DevSecOps, DevStarOps initiative that we see broadly across DoD and especially within the Air Force is really focused on building a continuous integration, continuous development pipeline for software that then would be implemented and deployed into these weapon systems. And it's very important because that is the tool chain essentially for software code development that is going to identify any sources of problem, whether it be a threat or just error, because it's not just about adversarial threat. It could be about the performance and the behavior of the software code that's written and the applications that are deployed to the platform. That's a second big, I'd say, emphasis that we have, and you'll see across our customer community, is really getting that continuous integration, continuous development, software development pipeline right. That way we can have a constant flow stream of good software that then goes into these systems and is implemented. And then the third area is really, around training, awareness, and education, both to our workforce and not just the cyber workforce, but to program managers and engineers and scientists that are working across these weapon systems to be aware and understanding of how to protect them and how to insert survivability into their processes and practices to assure that it's there built from the ground up.
And just, I know we're going to do a much more in-depth program on DevSecOps, but just for our audience to understand, because they hear cyber folks drop that term all the time, what does DevSecOps mean?
So DevSecOps is, in very simple terms, is a pipeline or an assembly line that you would have at a manufacturing plant but it's software code. So you're starting with, people creating applications, inserting them in what's called a container or containerizing those applications. And that container goes into a pipeline of tools and technologies that does things for software code assurance, code security, assuring the code is compliant with whatever standards have been set forth by an organization, the actual testing of that code, and then the integration and implementation of that code onto a platform.
And let me take you to the last question. What's the role of survivability and resiliency in the Pentagon's new cybersecurity maturity model certification, which is designed to improve the cybersecurity of the entire defense industrial base?
Yeah, the role of survivability and resilience with respect to CMMC is really focused on I would say broadly, the supply chain, and assuring that the code, the software, and the systems that are developed are meeting a set of standards that's acceptable to assure that you don't have inherent vulnerabilities or inherent issues within the quality of the software or the system that's created. So CMMC is one of those checkpoints, I would describe it as, that's part of that pipeline of new software, new technologies, new capabilities, and how they flow into our weapon systems and platforms.
Chris, thanks very much for joining us, and look forward to having you back on again.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you.
And thanks for joining us. Please follow our daily interviews with top government, military, industry, and thought leaders at Defense and Aerospace Report, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at DefAero Report. That's at DEFAERO Report. Like us on Facebook at Defense and Aerospace Report, and check us out on LinkedIn. Check out our weekly cyber report sponsored by Northrop Grumman. For more than 80 years, Bell has pushed past the boundaries of what's possible to drive aviation forward, going above and beyond flight, bellflight.com. Thanks again to Bell for their generous sponsorship, and we'll see you again tomorrow.